This is Chris with Space Cabin Audio, and today on Thinking Like a Drummer, we're going to take a look at the single stroke rudiment and how to program that in your drum virtual instrument. Let's do it. On its face, a single stroke rudiment is very simple. It's basically left hand, right hand, left hand, right hand, just alternating hits. So to program a single stroke roll is also quite easy, but we're actually going to take it a little bit more in depth than just that. But let's program a simple single stroke rudiment right now. Here is a single stroke rudiment. Here we go. This is 4/8 notes. Usually a single stroke rudiment is what you'll learn when you first go to take a drum lesson. It's a way to kind of teach you to hit the drum, how to count, how to be a little bit more ambidextrous with your hands. But instead of looking at this part of the single stroke rudiment, because, even if you've never drummed before, you understand what this is, let's take a look at the single stroke 4 rudiment. The single stroke 4 rudiment is a little bit different. It's 4 hits, as the name would imply. The single stroke 4 is a triplet followed by an 8th note, or a 16th note, or any other solid note value. So on the snare drum here, I'm going to program in a 16th note triplet. Now, I'm going to program in an 8th note. Now, the 8th note is going to be right here. If I was to take off triplets and just put in an 8th note, I can do that here. And here's what the single stroke 4 sounds like. Now, that's at 60 beats per minute. Let me just get rid of all this here. I don't need that. That's at 60 beats per minute. Let's listen to it at 100 beats per minute. Now that's probably starting to sound fairly familiar. I'm going to go up to 120 just to show you again here. Let me zoom over to where it is. Very cool. Now this might seem kind of uninformative, like how am I going to use this rudiment when I'm programming drums? Well, that's the whole purpose of this tutorial, is to start getting you to think like a drummer. Even if you don't play drums, if you want to program realistic drum parts, you have to think like a drummer and you have to program like a drummer. Every drummer will use rudiments throughout their playing. Now, here we're looking at rudiments as only on the snare drum. But these can be played with any combination of pieces on the kit. You don't necessarily have to play them all on the snare. Let me grab a groove here. Let's take a listen to this. Now, where could we use a single stroke 4 here? Well, it's very simple. How about at the end of this groove, we add in a single stroke 4. So in this particular case, I have the snare drum here. I'm on 16th note triplets on my grid, and I'm just going to program in a 16th note triplet here right at the end. Now, let's take a listen to how this sounds. It's going to sound terrible, but you're going to get the idea here pretty soon. Notice that the first 3 notes, or the triplet of the single stroke 4, is at the end of the groove, but the 4th note is actually at the start of the groove. So if I was to duplicate this, we would see that the 4th note would be the kick drum right here. So how are we going to use this? How does this make sense? This sounds like a terribly programmed rudiment. Let's say I wanted to give this kick drum a little bit more push without changing the velocity of the kick. So I'm going to go up into my MIDI editor here. I'm going to zoom in on what I'm doing. And I'm going to turn on the dynamic transport so that we don't lose anything. And I'm going to take a look at just at this section, just at this rudiment. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll just extend that so we have it. Let's take a look at this rudiment. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this would be considered a single stroke 4. It doesn't always have to be just on one kit piece. So for instance, here we're combining 3 snare hits as the triplet and the kick as the 8th note. I'm now going to just take all of these down in velocity, bring them way down, and then I'm going to program it like a drummer is actually rolling on it. Here we go. Left, right, left, right. Let's take a listen now. Very cool. We're now getting a little bit of a push into that kick drum. I'm going to just adjust these velocities a little bit more. Now, this can be done with one hand, but let's say that it's going to be done with two. So I'm just going to remove this hi-hat here. Now that I've done that, I'm going to be able to actually turn these up a bit and give it a little bit more of a feel. I'm going to take them up just a bit more even. That's very cool. Now we have this rudiment happening that gives that kick a bit of a push. At the end of this groove here, I'm actually going to change this up a little bit. Instead of it being on the snare, I'm going to go snare, tom, tom, kick. I'm also going to really jazz. Make that snare quite loud. I'm now going to raise up these velocities as well. And because it's going to loop at this point, I'm also going to add a crash cymbal in with this kick drum. So I'm just going to take this hi-hat away. And I'm going to crank up the cymbal quite a bit. Let's take a listen now. That cymbal's maybe a little bit too loud. Let's turn that down a little bit more. Here it comes again. Feel free to experiment where you're placing the hits. In this example, I'm using crash cymbals. There you have it. We're now programming a single stroke 4 rudiment. This is really important to learn about all of the rudiments when you're playing drums, not just how to program them, but also how to put them into context in a song. We could spend all day changing this rudiment up. Here I've done a few different examples for you. You can take this and move it to wherever you want. Stay tuned for next week when we go over another rudiment. This is Chris from Space Cabin Audio. Talk to you soon.